Psychology Today picks out a small percentage of its articles as essential reads, and I've reviewed a couple of hundred of them lately, and noted ideas from within them that strike me as particularly useful and fresh, and I want to share them with you, as well as, in following each one, I'm going to offer a comment or usually an amplification. First article that I drew from was called How to Remember Stories. When you hear a killer story, right away in the little notebook you always carry in your back pocket, right? Jot it down. Don't flesh it out for at least a week. Waiting helps you separate the wheat from the chaff. And here's a sample story that was included in that article, which is funny to me and also instructive. Rabbi, how do you know so many stories? And how do you choose the stories to tell that are so perfect for the subject? Your question, the rabbi said, reminds me of a story. On the outskirts of a village, there lived an aspiring young archer. While headed into town one day, the archer noticed a barn with chalk circles drawn all over its side. Someone had been using those circles for target practice, and whoever it was an ace. In each circle there was an arrow dead center. One day the young man knocked on the farmhouse door. "Excuse me," he asked, "but do you know who this marksman is who can shoot 100 perfect bullseyes?" "Oh, that's the town fool," the farmer said. "You think he shoots bullets in circles, but actually he shoots first and then he draws the circle." "And that's the way it is for me," the rabbi told the student. "I don't just happen to have these perfect stories that fit into the subject being discussed. Instead, when I find a story I particularly like, I steer the conversation that way so I can introduce the story." Here's my little addition. I always carry a flip note with me. It's a particularly convenient medium for taking notes. It fits into any pocket. It's like a little memo pad. Its covers are aluminum so it doesn't get dog-eared, and you can't close it without reinserting its little pen, so you always have a pen handy. I leave the flip note on my wallet when I come home, which ensures that I have it at the ready whenever I go out, not just for stories, but for ideas and things I need to do. This is the longest, by the way, of the 18, so don't think I'm going to be talking to you that long. The second article that Psychology Today picked out as an essential read that I found a really nice idea from is an article called The Science of Flirting, Deciphering Subtle Signals. And here's the quote. "In the studies, real interest was only discernible if women kept giving signals over time. Later in the conversation, women who were interested tended to tilt their heads, used more hand gestures, and played with their clothing more. Men who were interested spent more time talking." Here's my comment. I wonder if men's increased talking is counterproductive. Most people want to be heard more than talked at. The next essential read that I drew from was called 3 Ways to Feel Better Right Now. And there's the quote. "Researchers have demonstrated that just a few minutes of deep and slow breathing can significantly decrease feelings of anger, depression, tension, even physical pain. There's not much evidence that the specific program of deep and slow breathing that you follow matters. Just pick one that's comfortable for you." What I would add is that my clients and I have found that even a single slow, deep breath can be calming. The next essential read that I drew from was called Breaking Bread Together Leads to Better Negotiation Outcomes. Families, and this is the quote, "Families, teams, and other social groups that eat together may fare better than groups that don't. Negotiations that take place via Zoom may be at a disadvantage because they can't be preceded by an in-person communal meal. Perhaps it's time to invent a new ritual that can be performed at a distance, yet maintains the essential features of breaking bread together." What I would add is, yes, I am seeing increasing numbers of breakfast, lunch, and dinner Zoom meetings. I've even seen one in which the convener drove her home-baked brownies to the 5 other participants' homes. Of course, they were all nearby. She simply drove to each home, rang the bell, and left the brownies with a note saying, "Here's to a good meeting at 11, even if it is on Zoom." The next article I drew from was called Are You Lonely or A-Lonely? A lonely people, this is the quote, a lonely people inherently desire more solitude than do others, and when it's not connected with shyness or social anxiety, seeking time alone is a perfectly well-adjusted thing to do, end quote. And my addition, yes, that's becoming more acceptable, in part thanks to my fellow Psychology Today blogger Bella DePaulo's extensive research and writing on the viability, often the wisdom, of the largely solo life. The next essential read that I drew from was called Say Good Morning to Your Neighbors. Here's the quote. Say good morning to your neighbors. Look for ways to establish and maintain neighborhood connections. Participate in or initiate community activities, block parties, spring cleanups, local fundraisers, school counselor, church choir, neighborhood sports, whatever interests you and your child. And here's my addition. I've taken to putting a container of dozens of butterfly steaks with a sign saying indoor-outdoor butterfly steaks right next to it. Take as many as you like. They only cost me 20 cents each, and I've now given away maybe 300. So for $60, my block and now the surrounding blocks have become a veritable butterfly alley, which is a bit of a balm in these COVID-depressed times. The next essential read that I drew from was called Random Words of Kindness. And here's the quote. Across these 5 experiments, there was a consistent pattern of results. In every case, the compliment giver underestimated the positive impact on the compliment receiver and overestimated the negative impact. Here's my addition. Yes, people are reluctant to give compliments for fear of it seeming like a come on, it coming out awkward, or of making the person feel less than, making themselves feel less than. But it's worth looking for opportunities to give an earned compliment, even if awkwardly delivered. And if it is a come on, a legitimate compliment isn't a bad approach to it. The next essential read I drew from was called How to Build Happier Workplaces After the COVID Era. And here's the quote. For those that can work from home, a hybrid model that allows flexibility is ideal. Choosing a few days a week to work from home for tasks best suited to do so, while choosing to work from the office or being on the road for a few days in order to build social and intellectual capital can give the best of both worlds. Here's my addition. One size doesn't fit all. Some people are best working from home full time, others never. Some work can be done remotely, others cannot. Some people need a watchful eye of the boss, others don't. Some have a quiet home, others not. So, flexibility should rule. The next essential read that I drew from was called 12 Active Ways to Conquer Anxiety and Depression. And here's the quote. Anxiety and depression often fill our minds with potential problems and feared failures, as though we're victims of circumstance. Start to turn the tables. Decide first thing in the morning what kind of day you'll have. What thoughts will you cultivate? How will you find joy? Who will you love? What quality of presence will you bring to any challenges you meet? You are the author of your days. Decide what is worthy of your energy and attention. Here's my addition. That likely will help from mild anxiety or sadness, but less well, if at all, from moderate to severe anxiety or depression. It probably couldn't hurt to try, but don't beat yourself up if the result isn't as good as that quote suggests. The next essential read I drew from was called All Therapy is Exposure Therapy. Here's the quote. Therapy involves a guided attempt to overcome avoidance. Most therapy that works enacts the exposure process. To a non-trivial degree, all therapy is exposure therapy. And I add, well, in some situations, avoidance may be wise. For example, is it always wise to focus on past trauma? The next essential read I drew from was called How to Recognize and Respond to a Fake Apology. Here's the quote. Notoriously bad ways to make amends? A statement that contains a but, like, I'm sorry, but, that invalidates the apology. Similarly, if, I'm sorry, if, that suggests that your hurt may not have happened. Vague wording for what happened fails to take personal responsibility. Passive voice. The mistake that you were affected by is squirming out of responsibility. And finally, too many words, explanations, and justifications crowds the picture. So what I'll add is, that does seem right. I would add, though, that it's not always wise to apologize for a wrongdoing. For example, if the recipient of the apology will use it to get excessive recompense or power. Let's say you said something insensitive. Assess whether your apology will make it more likely that your partner will keep bringing it up as a way of gaining power over you. The next essential read I drew from was called Why, quote, Normal People Intentionally Hurt Others. Here's the quote. Sadism, although uncommon generally, is more common than we think. We might excuse mean-spirited behavior as a joke when it might signal something more sinister. Accordingly, in choosing friends and romantic partners, we should examine manners as well as the underlying motivation. What I would add is, I agree. I'd add only that a single hurtful statement or act is more likely to be inadvertent, but a second, and especially a third, may signal that it's time to avoid the person. The next essential read I drew from was called, Are There Really Multiple Intelligences? That post's author, Jonathan Y., quotes from Russell Warren's new book called In the Know, 35 Myths About Human Intelligence. And here is the quote. One myth I address is that it is difficult to measure intelligence. The reality is that it is one of the easiest psychological traits to measure. Because intelligence is general, any task that requires some sort of cognitive effort will measure intelligence. Academic tests, short-term memory tasks, logic problems, pattern completion, and many, many other tasks can all measure intelligence, end quote. What I would add is a quote from somebody else, Greg Barnett. He is the Senior Vice President of Science at Predictive Index. He wrote that tests of cognitive ability are, quote, among the best predictors of training success and job performance across all job levels and industries. People with higher scores on these tests tend to catch on quickly, figure things out on their own, and make sense of things in relatively short order, end quote. The next essential read I drew from is Pseudoscientific Treatments for Addiction Are Everywhere. Here is the quote from that. Naturopathy, defined by the Canadian Association of Naturopathic Doctors, is an umbrella term for a host of treatments that adopt a philosophy, quote, to stimulate the healing power of the body and treat the underlying cause of disease, end quote. And that was the quote from the Canadian Association, but this is still from this article. Problematically, the precise nature of how naturopathy treats the underlying cause of addiction remains unclear and dependent on the often implausible theoretical rationale for the particular naturopathic treatment. One such treatment is homeopathy, which is a pseudoscientific, widely discredited, and unsafe approach to health, wherein the final product is typically just distilled water. Unfortunately, naturopathic treatments for addiction are widely promoted in popular media and alternative medical circles. My addition to that comports with what I've read in both scientific as well as popular publications, including in Consumer Reports. The next essential read that I drew from was called Why No One Should Be Surprised at Politicians' Scandals. And here's the quote. Psychological data indicate there really is something about politicians that predisposes them to scandalous behavior, prevents them from owning up to it, understanding the hypocrisy of contradictory public statements, and caring about the mismatch between their public persona and their private activities. I'm continuing the quote. There are personality features that distinguish such people and keep them from realizing the effect of what they've done to others. Narcissism, power motivation, high risk-taking, and a false self. Politicians are more likely than others to display them all, end quote. I simply wrote, this makes sense to me. The next essential read I drew from was called Why the Pursuit of Unanimous Beliefs Can Harm Us All. And here's the quote. Getting others to see exactly the way we do has become a central preoccupation in our culture. When someone voices a different opinion or prefers something we despise, it makes us angry, anxious, and frustrated. This in turn leads many people to employ questionable persuasion and censorship methods, often under the cloak of anonymity. If they don't fall in line with the group's belief or stances, individuals are called out or publicly shamed or worse, threatened with physical harm. If none of these strategies work, they are canceled out entirely. The quote continues. Many group members agree with the majority's opinion just because they feel obligated to do so, or are unsure of their own opinion, or even silently intimidated by the majority. The result is what psychologist Irving Janis has described as groupthink. Here's my addition. It is a timeless axiom that wise decisions, whether our own or those made by our leaders, emanate not from censoring or censuring unpopular views, but from respectful consideration of the full marketplace of responsibly derived ideas. The next essential read I drew from is, and there's two more left to give you a sense of context, it's called Alternate Realities, A Tale of Two Echo Chambers, and here's the quote. Of course, political polarization isn't new, but it is a kind of rubber band that stretches apart and relaxes over time. Echo chambers have stretched that rubber band to its breaking point, such that we could see it snap in the form of something like civil war, or contract in response to some other form of cultural revolution. My addition is, while it may not seem likely today, I remain optimistic that eventually the self-correcting effect of an educated populace will rein in extremism from both the left and right, so there won't be a, quote, civil war nor a, quote, cultural revolution, but moderation-centric steps toward a better society. And the final essential read that I drew from is called, Do Kids Really Misbehave for Attention? The attention-seeking, and here's the quote, the attention-seeking hypothesis has been challenged. Instead of giving your child a timeout when he gets out of control, for example, you give him a time in by engaging with him in a warm and sympathetic way to help him learn how to cope when he gets upset. Instead of demonstrating your authority by enforcing limits and rules, you negotiate and reason toward a solution that works for everyone. My addition, of course, in parents' busy lives, there won't always be time or patience for, quote, engaging with him in a warm and a sympathetic way. But it is a worthy aspiration. I do know that as a child, I would have loved my parents to use such an approach, even if it was just intermittently. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.